Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for staying through the whole day today. I know it's been a long day, but a really exciting one. From the Center for American Progress, let me just say thank you again to our co-hosts and to everyone who's made this event go so smoothly and so well. I'm Kate Gordon, the Vice President of Energy Policy at the Center for American Progress. I have a great panel today on advancing energy security and independence, and I just wanted to say a couple of words about what we mean by energy security and independence before we get into the panel. At CAP, we're lucky to have as the head of our national security program, Rudy de Leon, who's a former Undersecretary of Defense. And he always says that national security is dependent first and foremost on economic security. And I think that's a critical point. We're talking here on the panel about economic security and national security with an eye toward sort of how do we make the country as a whole more competitive, more innovative, more secure. All those things go together. So what you'll hear from the panel is a real mix of perspectives from both the sort of defense and national security side and also from the economic and economic security side. That point about competitiveness is one we've heard a lot about today, and it's an important one. You know, despite several recent articles claiming the contrary, I think it's important to remember that clean energy industries are a bright spot in our economy right now. We have been going through a very difficult recession, but we've seen in clean energy industries, as the Brookings Institute tells us, 2 times the level of growth in some of these industries as in the economy as a whole. In Nevada, actually, we've seen 11% growth since 2007 in clean energy industries and 25% growth in energy efficiency and conservation industries. That in a state that, as you'll hear, has been losing jobs and having a very tough time in this recession. States are also beginning to diversify their economies through clean energy investments to really start looking at not just investments in sort of the classic real estate, finance, and insurance industries that have gotten us into some financial difficulties in the past, but also into construction and manufacturing, production and exports, things that are really starting to diversify these economies and make them more secure overall. But while some states like Nevada and like the other states you've heard from the governors earlier today are clean energy leaders through their policies and their practices, the U.S. as a whole is falling behind. I think Secretary Chu did a great job of painting this picture, but I'll just say a little bit more about it. China and the European Union in particular are moving quickly to pass policies, financing programs, and perhaps most important, big infrastructure programs that are helping them to become world leaders in clean energy. And these programs aren't just your sort of the renewable energy standards that you keep hearing about, feed-in tariffs, policies on financing. They're also investments in basic infrastructure to move that energy from place to place. They're also investments in workforce and workforce training and workforce development. These are critical investments of the kind that the United States used to make to bring us to a leadership position that are now bringing those countries to a leadership position. As Secretary Chu said, China has now surpassed us as an advanced manufacturing exporter. And when President Hu came to visit the United States a couple of months ago, he brought 150 people with him, many of whom spent their time going to our national labs and looking for technologies to then import back to China and commercialize there. So this is a serious problem. Whatever today's political climate, I think there's no doubt that we will wake up 5 or 10 or 15 or 20, I hope not 20, years from now and realize that climate change is real and realize we need to do something about our energy and security. The question is, will we have to respond at that point by becoming the world's largest buyer of other countries' technologies and innovations? Or will we need to import skilled workers to be able to run these technologies and make them and maintain them? Or will we be able to actually lead in this arena? We all on the panel, and I think in the audience, agree this scenario is not a recipe for energy security, national security, or energy independence. And I think the panel is here to talk about what they're doing at their individual organizations, businesses, and labor unions to advance a better vision of United States energy and economic security. So what I'm going to do is start by asking each of the panelists, introducing them and asking them each a question to give them a chance to tell you what they're working on. While I'm doing that, I encourage you to take the opportunity to text and tweet questions that we can look at later in the panel. On the back of your name cards, you'll see the instructions on how to do that, and we will be getting to those after we do a little bit of introduction from each of the panelists. So let me turn first to Dr. Robine, Dr. Dorothy Robine from Defense Department, Dr. Robine's the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Installations and Environment, which basically means that she oversees all military installations everywhere. It's a big job. The DoD is, as Secretary Mabus just said, a leader in clean energy. And, not just that, but a leader in really looking at energy as an issue that runs from innovation through production to installation through maintenance. It's sort of all the way across the value chain. Where are we doing those investments and how do we maintain those jobs and investments here? How can we get clean energy to become the kind of thing that other technologies have been through the DoD? You've kind of spurred the internet. You've spurred microwaves and any number of other technologies. How can we get there on clean energy?
Well, let me, I think you heard two themes from Secretary Mabus, and these are themes that have run throughout the comments of a number of speakers today, and I want to amplify them. And the first is that there is a national security interest here. What you heard Secretary Mabus say is, this is all about self-interest for the Defense Department. We are doing this. It's a business decision for us, if you will, to try to reduce our very high level of energy consumption. And if I had one slide to show, it would be a slide of a truck convoy snaking its way through the Kandahar Valley on its way to Afghanistan carrying fuel and water. As Secretary Mabus said, we lose a Marine or a contractor for every 25 convoys. So it's become a life-saving mission to reduce our consumption. On the facility side, which I oversee, our domestic installations, there's also a mission interest. We spend $4 billion a year to power our installations. Why so much? Because we have a lot of buildings. We have 500 installations, 300,000 buildings, 2.2 billion square feet of space. That's 3 times as much as Walmart, 10 times as much as GSA, the landlord to the federal government. And we have 200,000 fleet vehicles, non-tactical vehicles. So we are a huge consumer of energy. That's expensive, $4 billion a year. That's a lot, even by DoD standards. Second, we're concerned about mission assurance. Our domestic installations, even though we're far from where the combat is, our domestic installations increasingly provide direct support for combat operations. So we are flying unmanned aerial vehicles. We are analyzing intelligence battlefield data. We're even flying long-range bombers from our installations right here in the United States. We are dependent almost 100% on a commercial electricity grid that experts tell us is vulnerable to disruption, and that's a problem for us. So reducing that vulnerability is a goal of ours. Now, I may have gone over my allotted time. There's a lot to say about what we can do, and I think it does have to do with with 2 key things. We are very large, so we have a huge potential demand for clean energy and for energy efficiency technology. And we have a 200-year history of leadership in technology, going back to a wonderful example the Vice President used, which I use all the time, Eli Whitney, interchangeable machine-made parts for musket production. That's what created the U.S. system of manufacturers. So we have when something is in our mission interest, we can bring our power carrying out R&D, number 1. Number 2, as an early adopter, sophisticated early adopter of new technology. And then number 3, as a large consumer to jumpstart the commercial market. We have done that before. I think we can do that here. I'll say more about that over the course of the hour.
Thanks so much. That's great. Turning to Danny Thompson, who is this Executive Secretary Treasurer of the AFL-CIO here in Nevada, which means that he's responsible for shepherding 225,000 members, 125 chapters. It's a lot of people, a lot of workers. Danny helped put the minimum wage up here in the state, and I think that's another important facet of this whole economic security question is, how do we maintain a middle class? Because that's one of the ways we stay most secure. Danny, what's labor's role in this whole clean energy transformation? What are you doing here in Nevada in particular to sort of advance these ideas that we're hearing about today? And where do you see labor playing a role in the politics and the policy?
Well, you know, Nevada is in a place where we've never been. I think it's no secret that we have the highest unemployment in the nation. And we probably have one of the least diversified economies in the nation. And that over the years, we've built a dependency on gaming and tourism. And, you know, in the day when you know, in the 1980s, the only place you could legally gamble was right here in the state of Nevada. Today, you can gamble in some 47 states and however many different foreign countries and on the internet. That's led us to a place where we are today. And we have long sought to diversify our economy, you know, with not a lot of opportunities. I mean, the other industry in Nevada is mining. Nevada is the largest producer of gold and silver in the United States. It's the third largest producer of gold in the world. And so generally when the economy's bad, the price of gold is up. When the economy is good, the price of gold is down. And so it's not been reliable. The thing that we see as the opportunity is the renewable energy industry. And when I say that, I'm not just talking about when you build a solar plant or you build a geothermal plant or you build, because we're blessed with an abundance of the sun. We're in northern Nevada, we have an abundance of geothermal opportunities, and we have some great opportunities for wind in this state. But I'm not just talking about the construction of the facilities, I'm talking about the manufacturing, the maintenance, and the operation of those facilities. I think affords the biggest opportunity we have to diversify our economy that we've ever seen, because there's been a lot of talk of that. And then I think the interesting thing that the secretary just said is, you know, you make the energy where you burn the energy. And I think that, you know, overall for the middle class, and we are the middle class, the biggest threat to the economic security of the middle class is the dependency on foreign oil and foreign sources of energy. We need to look at this more like something we need to grow and use here. And, you know, it's kind of like renting your home versus owning your home. And so the opportunity, I think, to diversify our economy is renewable energies.
That's fantastic. I rent my home, so I'm feeling a little sensitive. So turning to a subject that many people find very confusing, which is the power grid. We have Chairman Wellinghoff, who's the chairman of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, as it's normally called. Also closer to home was the primary author of Nevada's renewable energy law, so that's a great achievement. Many people, although we know that energy is important and we know that renewable energy is important, the power grid is a mystery to people. But in fact, you oversee what is the basic infrastructure of the energy system in a lot of ways. It's sort of the highway, bridges, roads, and also the communications network of our entire energy and our electricity system. So we heard from Secretary Chu that the U.S. is behind in grid investments, that we are looking at China with these new transmission lines that are super fast, that we need to be doing investments to make our grid system stronger. And I know you've done work on making it smarter and more secure as well. What are you doing at FERC to really move toward the future when it comes to the power grid?
Well, we think the power grid is a very important aspect of our overall economy. You know, yesterday in the Wall Street Journal pitted the green energy strategy of the administration against economic diversity and development. And I think that's really the wrong way to frame it. We really need to frame it as the energy development in green and sustainability as where we're going to get us to economic development and economic diversity. In fact, you know, when I worked on the renewable energy standard with a number of people in this state like Rose McKinney James, we looked at it as something to diversify our economy in Nevada, and I think it is succeeding to do that. But as part of that, if we're going to really deliver that promise to this country and to the some 30 states that have renewable portfolio standards and potentially getting a clean energy standard in the nation, we're going to have transmission, because you have to have the ability to move those energy resources from where they are being produced in those remote locations where we have wind and solar and geothermal to those areas where they need them, where the loads are. Because we have a much different energy structure moving forward, utilizing those green resources than we did in the past. In the past, we had a localized energy system with local monopoly utilities that delivered energy to their customers based primarily on fossil fuel plants that were fairly close to loads. That's changing very rapidly. So we at FERC are doing a number of things. We're putting into place a number of rules and regulations that we believe, instead of inhibiting these types of activities, will in fact promote them through enhancing competition, opening up the ability of new people to get into investment in transmission, which you think is absolutely essential. We need to, one thing we just did in a recent rule is remove something called the right of first refusal, so that local utilities don't have a monopoly on the ability to build these larger transmission lines necessary for delivering new renewable energy resources to loads. And also, beyond that, we're really trying to enhance markets and look at markets in the wholesale area that we have jurisdiction over, so that not only we can build transmission and deliver new resources like renewables to loads, but also do things on the demand side like deliver energy efficiency and demand response into the system to compete with things like existing resources and new resources as well.
Well, and just one follow-up question. You know, people talk a lot lately about grid security, which is really an issue that this panel sort of, we intersect on a number of issues here, but that's one. What are the concerns about grid security, and sort of what are the scenarios people are painting, and what are your responses to that?
Well, I'd tell you, but I'd have to kill you. There are some very substantial concerns about grid security, not to make a joke of it, and there's a lot of discussions ongoing on Congress. In fact, there's, I think, sort of dueling bills right now in the Senate and the House with respect to grid security and how we may move forward with a more secure grid from a standpoint of having comprehensive oversight of security. FERC has responsibility for the reliability of the grid, and that's distinct from security. Reliability on a long-term basis, we have rules that have been put in place by an agency that we designate called the North American Electric Reliability Council. They develop the rules and the standards, and we promulgate those standards into rules, and those are things that are mandatory that utilities have to comply with. But that doesn't take care of things like immediate cybersecurity threats and immediate physical threats to the grid. So those types of things are now being looked at in a number of different legislative initiatives to consolidate that authority, potentially in Homeland Security or other agencies, to ensure that the grid security is maintained.
That's great, thank you. Turning to our last panelist on this part of the agenda, Gary Loveman is the COO of Caesars Entertainment Corporation, which is not just the hotel and casino on the Strip, although this is domestic business is a big part of your business, I know, but also a worldwide enterprise. And I was happy to see in your bio that you have a BA from Wesleyan, as I do as well. So nice to have a fellow Wesleyan alum on the panel. Gary, you're not just thinking about the policies and the regulations that can advance a clean energy economy sort of in the big picture. You're really living the nuts and bolts of how do you implement new efficient technologies, how do you do energy conservation in a way that helps your bottom line, that's good for business. You know, tell us what you're doing, and specifically, but also tell us more generally what you think the role of business is in this energy transformation, especially when the politics are so hard.
Well, let me take the first question first. I think energy conservation and environmental activity broadly is one of these rare instances in business where there's a virtuous cycle available to us to pursue. That is, we can create circumstances that are favorable for all of our constituencies, that inspire our employees, which is a big part of this, and identify our brands favorably with our customers at the same time. So when we suggest to guests that when they're in our facilities, there's a multidimensional effort to try to be conscious of our energy consumption and to consistently seek to reduce it in a thoughtful way, we find that our employees are very enthusiastic about this. For many of them, it becomes a central part of why it is they want to work with us and what it is that brings excitement about their daily activities and their own motivations. Our customers are, some portion of them are engaged in that mission as well. It's a passion of theirs. And we wind up building better buildings, heating them and cooling them more efficiently, eliminating through all sorts of independent decisions the way that we use energy, the way we recycle food that would otherwise be wasted, the process of procurement through which we buy energy efficient products rather than ordering rather energy inefficient products and the like. And I think if you then expand that to business more broadly, there's leadership in a number of, among many of my colleagues across a wide range of industries that can enhance our energy security very substantially. I'm on the board of FedEx, as an example. Our chairman, Fred Smith, as you all know, has put forth some very far-reaching proposals for the electrification of delivery vehicles using energy that is available in the chairman's grid overnight and would take zillions of gallons of fossil fuel consumption out of those vehicles during the day. I'm not a good enough student of politics to understand why we don't do that tomorrow morning. And it seems to me that there are a number of these types of initiatives that have the capacity to make both modest improvements of the sort my company is doing and also much more far-reaching ones.
That's great. Well, and that leads me to a quick follow-up question, and I'll go to audience questions in a minute. But talking about electric vehicles, we've had a lot of electric vehicle discussion today and yesterday. And I know Senator Reid and John Podesta drove electric vehicles, and many people have been talking about them. Chairman Wellinghoff, what's the impact on the grid if we have a sudden influx of electric vehicles using all of that new power, and how do we balance that with the goals, overall goals of sort of reducing our energy consumption?
Well, a number of studies have shown, including a study done by the NRDC and also by EPRI, the Electric Power Research Institute, that we have sufficient reserve capacity currently on the grid that if we properly utilize these vehicles, that is, if we charge them on off-peak times, we can, in fact, convert 70% of our existing fossil fuel gasoline fleet to electric vehicles and not impact the grid at all. So, you know, that would be a huge conversion. It'll take us a long time to get there. But the key is to ensure that we do charge at times that are off-peak. And the way to encourage that is we have to set prices correctly. And it kind of goes on one of my themes that I hammer on, and that is that we have to set competitive prices in ways that consumers can respond to those prices and utilize them to control their costs. If we in fact do that, consumers are smart enough to understand when to use electricity and when more of it and when to use less of it, so they can ensure that they can minimize their bills. Consumers are very capable of that, but for so many years we've had a flat bill in this country where ultimately you get a bill once a month and you have, in essence, a flat rate, and that does not reflect the actual prices on the grid, because the prices on the wholesale grid vary minute by minute. And so ultimately, if we can somehow link up the wholesale prices with the retail prices, we can ensure that we do things like charge electric vehicles at the times when it's most economical to do so, and therefore not stress the grid.
Okay, if I just could pursue this point a second. What we've been experiencing economically in the last 2 years is a clear indication that whenever our economy picks up any momentum, energy prices rise and choke off that momentum. And then I can't employ as many of Danny's workers, and they don't have the tip income that they would expect, and so on. So we have to break this connection between some level of economic vitality, a consequent rise in energy prices, which then in turn stifles whatever nation level of economic activity we are enjoying in the first place. And the movement of some of this activity, particularly industrial activity like package delivery vehicles and things that can be planned in a much more concentrated way, off of fossil fuels and into these more efficient mechanisms, would be a tremendous step in the right direction.
That's a great point, and Chairman Wellinghoff, your point also reminds me of, you know, whenever you go to Europe and you ask people what their energy bills are, they can tell you what they pay per kilowatt hour to the dollar, to the cent, usually. Ask anyone, I doubt there are many of you in the audience today that know what you pay per kilowatt hour. Danny doesn't, I know, because I asked him earlier. So it is something that I think in the United States we just don't have a good sense of. It's sort of what are we actually paying, what does it actually pay for, how could we actually change that? So I'm going to go to a question from out there to everyone, but I'll start with you, Dr. Robine, which is a question you're hearing a lot in the media right now, and I hear whenever I debate at libertarian institutions, which is, can we actually compete on a global scale in this whole clean energy economy without a lot of subsidies and tax credits? Can we compete on the sort of quote-unquote free market in this clean energy world? What do you think? I mean, you're obviously working from an agency perspective. You're working with a federal budget, but you're also working with a number of private companies. So what do you think about that question?
Probably not. I mean, I think you know, I think the role that DoD has played historically demonstrates that new technologies do not automatically pop up out of the private sector. And you heard Secretary Chu talk about that this morning, the integrated circuits, computers. I mean, those are, it was not a subsidy in the sense of the tax credit for wind or solar, but there was typically heavy government investment in research and development, then a government role in as an early adopter, and then the government procurement as a way to stimulate the market. Now, the government did that in most of the cases we're talking about. The Defense Department did that for national security reasons, much along the similar argument to what Secretary Mabus is making for biofuels, although that's a commodity market as opposed to a technology market that we're talking about with here. But it has taken a government role of some kind to jumpstart those commercial markets, and I think that's true here as well.
And you talked about the DoD as procurer or consumer, which is a great kind of motivator of
government
sales.
Procurement is an overlooked tool in this whole debate. It's an absolutely critical tool. It's been critical historically. One reason the Defense Department has been so effective historically is because we've had we bring our own market, if you will. We typically do the R&D, and we make sure that, but then we buy it. We buy it so we can use it. We are a very disciplined purchaser of R&D, supporter of R&D, and a very, very disciplined adopter of technology, because it's got to work. It's got to work for our people out in the field. That has historically been a very powerful relationship, that the fact that we have this self-contained market. No other agency has been able to equal that. Now, in the case of clean energy, of energy efficiency technology, by and large, we don't need to do the R&D, because there is a tremendous amount of R&D being done in industry, supported by venture capital and supported by DOE. A lot of great stuff coming out of labs, but we have a absolutely critical role to play as an early adopter, and then for those technologies that prove effective, being an early customer in jump-starting the market. And I'm just going to give a plug for using our installations as a test bed. You heard the statistics this morning from Roger Platt on the improvements in energy efficiency in the building sector, and the numbers were worse than I thought. He said since 1980, 11% improvement in residential, 22% in commercial buildings. Commercial buildings are the unplucked fruit in the energy conservation world. There are substantial impediments to commercialization of technologies to make buildings more energy efficient, and I could talk for a long time about those, but it's a very fragmented market on the demand side. The first user bears high costs and gets no additional returns. There's a lot of reasons that lead to that low number of those numbers that Roger cited. It's risky to be the first user. We, the Defense Department, want to do that. On our installations, we have broad shoulders. We want to take that risk. We want to be the early adopter, and we have a formal program to do that, our Installation Energy Testbed Program, $30 million a year, hugely oversubscribed. We're doing it in informal ways as well. That's an absolutely critical piece of this whole puzzle, is getting over those impediments to the commercialization of the great technology that is coming out of industry.
That's great. It's always so inspiring to hear what you're doing within the department. Anyone else want to jump in on this sort of can we do without subsidy question?
Quickly add on the subsidy question. There's so often debate about this issue of subsidy. Should we be giving subsidies for renewables? Well, I think we have to remember that every single fuel source that we have was subsidized one way or the other. President Lincoln gave the railroads $16,000 for every 40 miles of track that was laid for the interstate railroads. If we didn't have interstate railroads, we wouldn't have coal, a coal industry, because the coal industry right now contributes 80% of the revenues to the railroads. So ultimately, we have to look at these subsidies in context. Michael Yukira talking about the very efficient gas plant that they just put in. That gas plant never would have been put in if the Air Force hadn't developed jet engines in the 50s and 60s, because every single combustion turbine gas plant in this country owes its roots to a aircraft derivative engine, is in essence what it is. So ultimately, these subsidies have been things that have gone over since time, a long, long time in our history, and they're something that are obviously going to continue. And with respect to the global markets, China right now is subsidizing its electric prices significantly. So from a standpoint of subsidies, we do have to look at jump-starting these new technologies like is being done in the Department of Defense and other parts of the government. It's absolutely essential to get these technologies on their feet and to move them into markets and make them competitive. But yes, they can be competitive. We're already starting to see them be competitive now.
Well, and this is a great point that we can also phase out subsidies when things become competitive. And you see that in European countries like Spain. A lot of its subsidies for solar have been, in fact, phased out as solar becomes more of a competitive force on the market. We, however, have not phased out our oil and gas subsidies, even though those are fairly competitive industries, I think, at this point in the United States. So worth looking across the board at the role of subsidies. Danny, did you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most significant thing I've heard in a long time is the fact that the military is now making a very conscious effort to change these things. And, you know, because if you're relying on states to do incentives, most of them are not unlike Nevada, where this recession has impacted them to the point that they have actually all went back and got out the list of incentives that they previously had been willing to give and actually have withdrawn those. And so the fact that the military, that work that they're doing will bring the price down and ultimately be good for everyone.
As a procurer, and also actually, Gary, to your point that private businesses are becoming big procurers too, so that's bringing the price down. You know, going back into another audience question, this one for Danny, about domestic manufacturing, you know, going back to some things that Secretary Mavis and Dr. Robine were saying about DOD, one thing you do at DOD is something that we might actually call industrial policy. I mean, you're essentially saying these are the technologies we want to develop, we will find people to develop them, we will help them develop them in the United States, and we will buy them.
Winners and losers.
Right, exactly. If anyone's doing industrial policy, it's the DOD. You know, one of the big components of that is manufacturing. I mean, you do not only domestic manufacturing of critical technologies, but you also do workforce training on domestic manufacturing of critical technologies. Danny, question for you from the audience is how do we get that to happen in the U.S. as a whole? How do we keep the manufacturing of these technologies here instead of kind of following that model where we do the innovation, we maybe do an early prototype, and then everything gets outsourced?
Well, I would say that, look, any American worker cannot compete with someone who doesn't have the same standards and requirements that we have in this country. If you are in another country and you're producing a refrigerator and you can't afford to buy the refrigerator, that's a model that doesn't work. You know, I think if you're talking about globally manufacturing, we have to be able to compete at the same level, both in, you know, child labor laws, environmental laws, and those kinds of things before these trade agreements are agreed to. I think there needs to be more consideration given to those things. Otherwise, I can't compete with somebody who makes $2 an hour, who doesn't have health insurance and can't afford to buy the products that they make.
Right. Anyone else want to jump in on this, the manufacturing question? We have a question for Gary from the audience. So how do energy costs and fluctuating electricity and gas prices impact your business? That's a great question, especially for a casino. We all think of casinos as big energy users, so you must be pretty sensitive to energy prices.
Well, we are, and we go at this in a couple of different ways. The first is to get all of the people that work with me who work in these facilities to take some interest in reducing these costs. So for example, if you've stayed in hotel rooms around the world, you've often found that when you arrive in the room is surprisingly cold. And the room is cold because the housekeeper has to clean 12 rooms that day, and it's hot work. So the first thing he or she does is turn the thermostat way down so that it's comfortable for them to do that kind of physical work, and they don't often turn it to the right temperature when they leave, and when you come in, it's systematically too cold. Or you walk through convention space like this, and the lights are always on, even in the middle of the night. So working with all of our 80-some-odd thousand people to try to get everyone's oriented around the idea that we can create a much better circumstance for everyone if we collectively attack this is, of course, very important. Then as we go to renovate these old buildings or build new ones to put as much energy efficiency into them as we can, all of these things work in this, I think, forcefully in this direction. Clean energy is of great interest to us, but at the moment it's just not even close to economic in most instances. So if we could get the differential down to something that you could get your arms around in most of these instances, then we would do it either as a matter of principle or some form of economics.
And would it need to be sort of at the same rate? I mean, what would you be willing to pay a little bit more for clean energy, or what's your sort of take on that?
Absolutely. We pay premiums, and businesses pay premiums for all sorts of things that they think enhance their circumstances with their employees or their customers. And we would certainly pay a premium for clean energy and proudly suggest to our customers and our colleagues that we used it. But the premium can't be of a first order. It has to be something that's a modest type of difference.
That makes sense. And you know, following up on that, and to everybody on the panel, what's going to get us there? I mean, what's going to get the costs down to where they need to be, and from a business perspective and also from a policy perspective?
Well, it comes from two different sources. I mean, people tend to focus their attention on the innovation and the technology itself, but you have this other issue, which is the price of these alternative fuels like natural gas have fallen to such a level that it's widening the gap with things like wind energy and other forms of renewable energy, not the reverse. So we focus a lot on the rising cost of petroleum, but as the cost of natural gas in this country is so far below what people had anticipated it would be, makes it very difficult to get off of a great deal of interest in natural gas and move on to other things.
Dr. Weinhaus, or Chairman Weinhaus?
I think ultimately it's going to be two things. I think it's going to be competition and infrastructure. I think the more we can have a competitive system where we can put on the table everything that's available, not only on the supply side, but also on the demand side, like energy efficiency, and have it compete equally. But on the infrastructure side, and speaking of natural gas and what Gary was referring to, right now we do have a system in this country where you can buy natural gas in Louisiana or in Oregon or in Montana or in Florida or in New York, and it's all the same price. You can't do that with electricity in this country. If we could do that with electricity, then we could have more and different sources of electricity compete, including wind energy, where they're signing contracts for wind energy right now in the Midwest at 3.5 cents a kilowatt hour, which could compete with gas. But you've got to make it deliverable. You've got to make it deliverable to the source, to where people need it, and ultimately have it competitive and open for people to be able to procure it.
Other thoughts on this? The sort of what makes it cheaper? What makes it doable?
I think I agree with Gary. It's the price. If the price of the energy gets to the point that it's prohibitive, then people are going to rush to something that is cheaper.
So we're hearing sort of a parallel conversation here. We're hearing about the security that we need from diversifying our energy sources, and also the security that we need from diversifying our economies, which is interesting. It's sort of diversification across the board. With an interesting thing coming out of this panel. So how do we, Danny, just to you on this sort of question that keeps coming up in the press in the last couple of weeks, how do we respond to this challenge that the green jobs aren't really here, that this isn't really the savior of the economy, that we're not really seeing the jobs that people think that we will have seen? What do you say to that? Well, I'm sure you hear that criticism all the time.
Well, the green jobs are here. I mean, and you know, you can point to Nellis Air Force Base or to any of these geothermal jobs in northern Nevada. They're here and they're real, and I think they represent the biggest opportunity for us to diversify our economy and create jobs. Because right now in this state, I mean, we've overbuilt a commercial space. We've overbuilt, and we had the housing bubble pop, and now we have the highest foreclosure rate in the United States. And it's cheaper to buy something than it is to build something, and so none of that's going to change for the foreseeable future. And that this technology offers the biggest opportunity, we believe, to change that. But they are real jobs, and you could go down the list of them for an hour here.
Yep. Right, and would we rather that those jobs didn't exist at all? I mean, they are in fact real jobs being created at a very difficult economic time. We are getting a countdown here, which this panel went very fast, so we're getting a countdown. So I think, just to sum up, this has been a great conversation about the sort of what's possible within government, and a really inspiring story about what you guys are actually trying to do in the DoD and at FERC. What's possible with our workers, our skilled workers, and our middle class that are really the backbone of any future energy economy here and what's possible through business, which is really moving ahead when politics is at a standstill, honestly, in most parts of the country. So thank you so much to all of our panelists, and we really appreciate it. And thanks to you all for listening.
That was right on time, wasn't it?